So let's start off with why we think the Selden Saljuice Winter Series has proven successful. And Simon, you're very welcome to pitch in on some of these because some of these were very much your idea. I mean, the thing that led me to put some of the existing events together 10 years ago, things like events like the Bloody Mary and the Grafham Grand Prix and the Tiger Trophy at Rutland, was that yeah, the idea that the sum is greater than the parts. So um, if, for example, you know, 10 years ago, you were sort of peeking your nose out the top of a duvet on a particularly cold winter's morning, and the Grafham Grand Prix was coming up that morning, and you hadn't yet entered because there was no online entry, then maybe you just wouldn't bother. Maybe the forecast didn't look that great, and maybe just wouldn't bother. So Simon came on board a couple of years after the start of the series, and some of the skills that he brought from Sail Racer. One of the obvious ones was bringing in advance online entry, so you could pay in advance with your credit card. And one of the things that's done is it gets much greater commitment out of the sailor to actually show up on the day. So that's one of the reasons why we think we've had good turnouts. It just, once you've made that small commitment of making your £30 entry fee, albeit, you know, that's not really a patch on the cost of petrol and accommodation, whatever else. It just seems to get a bit of buy-in from people, and it makes planning and logistics for the sailing club a whole lot easier in terms of how much lasagna to cook up, how many rescue boats they're going to need.
Ben Schooling, you're currently leading the Selden Saljuice Winter Series because, as we speak, there has been only one event, and it was the event that you won, the Fernhurst Books Draycott Dash. So, firstly, congratulations on that. I want to ask you, what keeps you coming back year after year to these winter events?
Oh, thanks very much, Andy. Yeah, I just really enjoy the challenge of sailing different courses, and yeah, there's a handicap racing. You know, it's just a different dynamic, I suppose. Sailing against different styles of boat, point very different angles. It's a different challenge getting off the start line, and I think it's just really good practice for the main sort of summer season, doing these different style of winter events.
The other thing I notice is that on a championship course, you and I can have a pretty good race, and I can get somewhere close to you on a championship course. I remember at the Oxford Blue about 3 years ago or so, you won it in your Musto skiff, and in my Musto skiff, I came exactly 100th out of 150. It seems to amplify all the little differences that don't get amplified on a championship course, which seems to test different skills, and obviously we're different weights as well, and sometimes those big winds and those big waves suit my larger frame than your more athletic frame, so that's part of it as well, isn't it? But how much do you find that it helps you at the start of the season when you come into the start of the Musto skiff fleet racing season in spring, for example?
Yeah, well, it's kind of you to say first, Andy, but yeah, no, I think it definitely does. The first event of this season was at Rutland Water, and I think there were 25 or so skiffs, and yeah, I won that. It was light winds, it was flat water, it was my kind of conditions. And you talk about you know, racing, and the main sort of thrust of the season tends to be more on the sea, and yeah, it can be bigger waves. You know, I suppose I've honed my skills at Datchet Water in the Musto, and my style and technique is very much flat water and sort of shifty conditions, and I guess that's where yeah, I'm a bit stronger. So yeah, I think that, but it definitely helps without a doubt. I mean, sharpening up on the boat handling, the different, you know, shapes of courses, tight reaches, lots of jibes, positioning the boat around, you know, starboard roundings and things like we had at the pursuit race of the Draycott Dash is just again a different challenge, and it's great for the season, the main season, definitely.
And for those that just want to stick, for example, let's say in the Musto skiff, to the standard windward-leeward racing, what relevance, if any, is there to doing starboard roundings and doing tight reaches where you may or may not be able to carry the kite, and there's all that congestion at the mark? So is there anything that you can take back from that into the kind of racing that you do in the Musto skiff class?
Yeah, I think it all helps for sure. Time in the water, and situations that where you've overstood a ley line perhaps, and tight reaching in with the kites to get back up to a mark. Starboard roundings, yeah, we don't tend to do many windward ones, but certainly leeward mark starboard roundings are handy for gates. So it's all, I think, transferable back into the standard format of windward leeward racing that we do. And I think it gives me confidence for tight boat on boat maneuvers. I can generally be confident in myself that I can get round in a tight squeeze, whereas others might choose not to and just take the safer option and lose a few boats as a consequence. So yeah, in the bigger breeze, where I struggle for weight, like you say, perhaps I can make up for with boat handling maneuvers and being confident.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with the Singleton Sailjuice Winter Series, because this is a series you've been trying to win for some years and you've come really close. You've started out in the best possible way. So I wish you the best of luck with that. But I also want to ask you about your thoughts on the Great British Sailing Challenge, where now there's a year-round competition, similar kind of format to that you're used to with the Winter Series, but culminating in a 100-boat winner-takes-all final at Rutland at the end of September. Now, of course, that series, certainly the summer events of that series, are going into the busy part of the season where classes have their own established open meeting calendar. What kind of appeal do you see then, and for you and for wider people? Is it something that you could envisage yourself doing, or are you going to be too busy already doing the established set of events on the Musto calendar?
Well, I think it's a great concept, and it will certainly be competitive with, as you say, the main sort of season and circuit of events that people commit to. But a big part of the appeal of the Winter Series again is, for me, is seeing old faces, like the Singletons and the RS800 and some of the other sort of players in the Scorpions and GPs and things, sailors I wouldn't normally see otherwise. And they're all friends. It's nice to see them. So I think that there's definitely that appeal. And some of the classes that have smaller, sort of single-digit entries for open meetings, again, it adds a lot of appeal, a bit of buzz around the club with 100 boats there, or a lot more boats in the dinghy park. It's just a more fun and appealing event, and it kind of throws back to how I used to compete, certainly in Scotland anyway, in open meetings. It would be all classes together. The club would host a regatta, and all sorts of different classes would turn up. You just have a slow, medium, fast handicap, and that's more what I was used to, I suppose. So it is good fun. Yeah, it's nice seeing different people in different classes, and I think it's a good way of displaying different classes as well. Certainly to people who are just going up the fleets, if you like, or going up the classes, to be able to see different boats in action, whereas normally you'd only ever see your own style of boat.
So the Great British Sailing Challenge is a series of events, typically a multi-class 100-boat type racing across the length and breadth of the country over the course of the year, culminating in the grand final in Rutland in September 2019, which will be an invitational-only affair.
Anyway, another interview that I did was with Ralph Singleton, who, with his daughter Sophie, is one of the regulars in the RS800 fleet. Now he's done a lot of sailing at Datchet, and he's entered for this weekend. And in fact, he is one of a number of teams that have committed to do all 7 events of this season. So,
Ralph Singleton, you sail the RS800 very regularly in the Singleton Sailjuice Winter Series with your daughter Sophie. So can you tell me your reasons for doing it and what you get out of that style of racing?
Yes, Andy. Sophie and I very much enjoy the Winter Series. Sailing on some of the larger lakes around the country is good practice in the winter season when the RS800's circuit has generally ended. To practice against other boats as well and meet old friends is also additionally great fun.
And so we get some RS800s, but as we see with the other classes, or a lot of the other classes, we don't get huge numbers. It tends to be a few people that turn up on a regular basis. What do your fellow RS800 sailors think about you competing in those kind of events?
I think jokingly they think I'm getting some illegal practice in over the cold winter when we should all be tucked up in some warm clothes. But that aside, I think they see the benefits. We've generally hit the RS 800 season running, having been well practiced over the winter period. So we certainly feel it adds a great deal to our season with the RS 800s.
Okay, so you're a little bit more practiced in terms of boat handling, and the other aspect, which I don't know if some people enjoy and maybe puts others off. Normally in RS 800 racing, it would be, I'm assuming, straight windward leeward racing, and the pattern of play is a little bit more predictable. How do you find the varied type of courses, and how do you cope with that in the RS 800?
Well, we get a good mix over the series. So things like the Grafton Grand Prix do offer some windward leeward sailing. Most of the others offer sort of trapezoid or P-type courses. I think Datchet does a mix of everything to try and make it fair. So that's good practice, and indeed, two-sail reaching whilst is pretty difficult in the RS 800. Is always fun, particularly in the blow. We also get a lot in terms of boat handling from sailing against other fleets of boats, and particularly in events such as the Bloody Mary, when as the fleet compresses towards the end of the race, you can be coming into marks with 20 or 30 other boats around the mark. So boat handling is imperative, and also to take the right route around the melee of boats at each mark.
So it's been great to see the Singletons out regularly. They actually follow one of the themes that we're keen to sort of exploit, and that's the sort of the family interest in these events. Ralph sailing with daughter Sophie, and we actually see quite a lot of families out there, either in the same boats or in multiple boats and across multiple generations.
Yeah, that is certainly one of the themes of the Selden Saljuice Winter Series, and it's a theme we're looking to extend through the Great British Sailing Challenge, and still in discussion with some clubs, so not yet announced on the calendar, but looking really to have an event next year exclusively for, well, not just families, as people sailing together as long as they are 18 years apart in age. So we'll call it something like the generation game or something like that, and really just to reconnect the different generations sailing together, because the youth squad system tends to be all about youth sailing with youth, or youth sailing in single-handed boats, and we're keen to promote parents sailing with their kids again, and if you're a first-generation sailor up and coming and your parents don't sail, for you to be able to race with somebody else. To address that question about doesn't one design give the best racing? Yes, it does. And so the RS Aeros, for example, they have come from nowhere in the last, whatever it is, 5 years. They've got a phenomenal circuit going. They don't need us. They don't need to be competing in the Selden Saljuice Winter Series, but they do. And so, for example, I was loaned a boat a couple of years ago to do the Oxford Blue. It was maxed out at the 150 entry limit, and I think it was 49 or 50 of those boats were the RS Aeros, because they came to use that event as one of their winter championship events. And so I spoke to Pete Barton about this. He's the guy, one of the big driving forces behind the success of the RS Aero, and I asked him some of the questions about why he chooses to get the RS Aero involved in these multi-class events when they really don't need us.
Pete Barton, you've been instrumental in building up the success of the RS Aero, which has seemingly come from nowhere to where it is today in an incredibly short space of time. So firstly, congratulations on that, and particularly on the RS Aero Worlds, which were an enormous event at Weymouth this year, weren't they?
Yes, it's fantastic. 206 boats, which from 16 countries is absolutely incredible.
So there's a great example of a class that is looking after itself perfectly happily, has got its own open meeting circuit. So the question for you is, with all that going on, why do you still choose for the RS Aero to turn up and do some of the Selden Saljuice Winter Series events, such as when you lent me a boat the other year at the Oxford Blue, and 150 boats there, and about 50 of them were RS Aeros? You don't need us. You could be doing all that by yourself.
Well, we could do, and it was a fantastic surprise when the entry kept on coming in, and we got to about 50 boats 2 years ago, was absolutely incredible. And we could evolve and have our own event, but as it stands at the moment, we enjoy joining the Sail Juice events because of the colourfulness of it. With all the other classes, actually adds to the experience and the camaraderie, and it's good to bump into all those old friends from other classes when you don't see them throughout the summer often.
Fantastic. Yeah, so that is one of the lovely social elements of it, that you do get that excuse to bump into people that you haven't seen in a while. Now, what about the nature of the racing? Because if you're a purist and you love your one design racing, how do you find that when you're competing with 100 other boats on that race course that aren't RS Aeros, that are getting in your way?
Well, we have to embrace both sides of it. In a way, we've got the best of both worlds because we've got the aero race and we take our own results out for our winter championships. But we've also got the big results sheet, which is 150 boats long, and that adds a lot of interest when we've got all that mix of boats on the same result sheet. So that's something we buy into and we're fully up for. Managing the traffic is part of that event, and we commit to that when we come to it.
Now, one of the other things I'm wondering is, I'm wondering when you've got a lot of confidence in the boat that you're sailing, you think you're sitting in and on a good product, is it an opportunity to showcase the RS Aero to other potential customers? Is it like having a dinghy show but on the water?
Well, totally. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. We could go and have an event all on our own, and we could have 60 RS Aeros there, and 60 RS Aero sailors would have a great time looking at 60 RS Aeros. But if you had 150 boat events and 100 of those boats are from other classes, yes, it is great for us to show our class to them.
Well, we're delighted that you want to be part of that series. And now my next question, and I haven't asked you this before, so I don't know what the answer is going to be, but we've launched the Great British Sailing Challenge. So now our challenge is, are we going to get the same kind of interest that we've seen over the last 10 years of the winter series if we now have multi-class handicap events during the summer? Because again, you've got your open meeting circuit organised by the RS Association. How likely are we to see Pete Barton or another RS Aero sailor competing in a Great British Sailing Challenge event during the summer?
Well, it all depends on the schedule, really. I mean, our schedule is already pretty well organised for next year. All the main events are in place, and we're just sorting out a few minor ones now. It depends which events you choose, whether they look interesting for us, and if they fit in with our calendar. Now, I'd say never, because a couple of years ago, we never thought the schedule would be quite as busy as it is now. And if we evolve with, already in the UK, we have 2 or 3 events clashing over a weekend, and we're able to sustain that geographically over the country because we've got the boats to fill it. So it might well be that if you are geographically spread from another RS Aero event, we might support both and support your event as well as one of our own if events did clash. So yes, it's all good fun, and price of petrol nowadays, it's good to avoid people having to travel too far for their weekend sailing.
Yeah, and actually you touch on a point there that we're looking to address in the GBSC, which is that we may well have events running on the same weekend, north and south or east and west, on the basis that you know, if they're far enough apart, they're really not going to affect each other. It sounds like that's where you're already at with the RS Aero.
Totally. We're already running events clashing in the north and south. I think last year we had one weekend where we had 3 RS Aero events in the same weekend at 3 different corners of the country, and each of them were sustainable in their own right. Brilliant.
Well, Peter, I didn't prime you on that call, but you've said all the right things. So thank you very much for that. And thanks for your ongoing support, because as I've said before, you guys really don't need us, but we appreciate you all the more for coming along and doing our events.
Well, I'm really grateful for you guys being so welcoming. We do enjoy it. And in fact, only today was I signing up for one of your Sail Juice events. So thank you for that.
It's a very good interview that I didn't prime Peter with his answers. I wanted to hear what he had to say honestly, and he had some very good things to say about why they choose to get involved. And one of them, for example, is if you think you've got a strong product and he believes in the RS Aero, then coming to do one of the multi-class events, like say the Oxford Blue, it is almost like a dinghy show on the water. You get a chance to show off your boat and maybe plane past a few other single-handers, and maybe it'll turn heads, and maybe some of the people sailing some of those other boats might be persuaded to go and sail the RS Aero. One of the questions that's been going around is why do we need more events, and doesn't One Design give the best racing? Well, yes, firstly, One Design, yes, it does give the best racing, and I'm certainly not going to dispute that, and it's probably what I would prefer. But the question then is for the classes that actually can't sustain their own open meeting circuit. And to give you an example, we have about 100 different types of boat compete in the Selden Saljuice Winter Series every winter, and I would reckon that maybe only the top 10 or 15 of those classes are really able to sustain a viable open meeting circuit in their own right. And so we already see a number of classes combining events where they've doubled or tripled up with other classes, so that when they knock on the door of a club and they want to have an open meeting, they've actually got some economies of scale that they can bring to the club. But then there are lots of boats out there. I mean, there were so many boats designed in the 1990s, lots of boats that Topper came out with bowsprits, bosses and ISOs and buzzes and things like that. And the same with Laser. They came out with the 5000, which I loved, and it was a fantastic boat. The 4000 and quite a few others, and they don't really exist with their own class association structures anymore. So at the very, very least, what we're offering with these multi-class handicap events is a place for the orphans, the waifs and strays to go to. And so that's been available across the winter. One of the benefits of the Great British Sailing Challenge is that if you've got an ISO or you've got a buzz or something just kicking around in the boat park, and you can't afford to buy anything else, then at least you've got a place to come and race it. And thanks to what the work of the Great Lakes group over the last few years, there's no such thing as a primary number, and you're only allowed to race if you've got an RYA primary number or any of that stuff. They will create a number for you, and it may not be the best number straight away, but the more racing you do, the more accurately your handicap number is reflected. And we'll come on to the next evolution of handicapping in a moment, because this is something that Simon has been working on. So quite apart from that, that's one of the benefits. Then this is a length and the breadth of the UK. We've got some very we've got a pretty good representation around the country. I had hoped to get some events in Scotland for the first year, and that may still happen. We have got an awful lot of clubs that wanted to come on board for 2019. So anyway, one of the key factors in the GBSC and how we're moving things forwards, you're already testing this, Simon, in the first events of the Saljuice Winter Series. It's the GBSC Performance Index, a different type of handicap measurement. So just tell us how that works, what technology is required.
Well, what we're trying to do is produce a performance comparison across different boats and different races. So doing a lot of measurements. We're measuring the wind, we're recording that, direction and strengths. But more critically, we're putting GPS trackers on all the boats and measuring a lot of data there. So we're taking the leg data, we know how long each leg is, the time, and the various VMGs and performances across that. And what we're doing is mashing up that data, and we're trying to see back in the sort of history of races, do we see a similar race that follows those sort of scenarios? And then that gives us a handicap which is really dynamic to those circumstances, and that allows us to make comparisons between the different races, the different courses and the different boats, which is really where a lot of other sports are in terms of, you think about running and even motorsports. So they can give you sort of timed runs and say, how long did the mile take, how long did the 100 meters take. Sailing is obviously different because there's so many variables, but we believe by taking a lot of measurements that we can sort of even some of that out.
Now, the Draycott recently, that was the first big test run, and we handed out a bunch of medals, which were different. Sometimes they overlapped with the results based on the Great Lakes handicapping, and in other respects they were different. So just tell us how you measured it and how it actually differs from the standard sort of handicapping format that we're used to in the case of the Draycott Dash.
So yeah, we're taking all the sort of GPS measurements, and effectively we're doing a what you might call a sort of time on distance rather than time on time sort of basis, and then mashing up the sort of winds. And yeah, we saw some differences, not massive differences, which is good. We're still sort of in a way sort of using the Great Lakes and the PYs as sort of benchmarks. But what it's allowing us to do, and there's a web page now up to do that, is that we can drill down to the data. So for example, we've grouped things into 4 different divisions, starting with the fast asymmetrics, the symmetrics, the slow asymmetrics, and the slow symmetrics. Basically boats that go dead downwind and boats that sort of have to jibe, and grouping them together. Here we see the results for the slow asymmetric with Alistair Goodwin, last year's winners, actually topping the table. And what it allows us to do is to really create some analysis. And for example, we can pop up a graph and bring up sort of some trends of what's going, see how a particular sailor is progressing. So this is the top 3. Interesting, we see Ed Highland, one of the top blaze sailors, actually on the trends performing, improving his performance across the weekend, whereas the other top 2 slightly declining. This will become more meaningful after sort of Datchet and more races come in there. But I think we're starting to see some exciting use of the data and direct comparison between sailors and between races.
Excellent. And there's many other ways that we're going to be able to use this, but we've got a lot of information flying at you already this evening, so we'll come back to that on another occasion.